Who is observing your thoughts? That is the question that can tear you out of the most intimate prison of your life. Because if you don't ask it now, you will keep confusing your essence with the voice that tortures you from within. You will keep calling I everything that merely passes through your mind. You will keep obeying fears that were never even born from truth. And you will grow old inside a cell without bars, made of memories, anxiety, comparison, and noise. Rumi stepped precisely into this territory where the human being stops kneeling before their own inner noise. And if you stay until the end, you may begin to feel, not as theory, but within your own chest, that there is something in you that sees the thought without being the thought. Your suffering does not begin when you think. Your suffering begins when you believe everything you think. That is the blow. That is the tear. That is the place where almost every human being gets lost without realizing it. A thought arises and you immediately say, "This is me." A memory comes and you say, "This is my truth." A fear speaks and you hand over your body, your mood, your peace, your energy, your entire day into its hands. And the cruelest part is that the mind changes its voice all the time, yet you keep calling all of them yourself. In the morning, you believe one thing. In the afternoon, another. At night, something completely different. One moment you feel capable of everything. The next, you feel worthless. One moment you want to stay. The next you want to run. One moment you love. The next you harden. And still, you insist on saying that all of this is a single unity called I. It isn't. It is movement. It is cloud. It is current. It is an inner theater. And as long as you don't see this, you will continue to be dragged by whichever thought speaks the loudest. I know this place. I know the feeling of hearing the mind trying to dress itself as absolute truth. I know the silent violence of a thought that enters small and within minutes takes over your face, your breathing, your chest, the way you look at the world. I know what it is to feel a dark thought arrive and, without noticing, begin to live as its servant. And it was precisely there that the question changed everything. If I can see this thought arriving, then who is this I that is seeing? Because what is seen cannot be what sees. What appears cannot be the presence in which it appears. What changes cannot be that which perceives the change. And when this begins to be truly felt, something inside you trembles, because your entire prison was built on the confusion between consciousness and content. That is why this question hurts so much, because it doesn't only wound the thought, it wounds the false identity you built around it. It tears from your hands the oldest mask, the belief that you are your narrative, and your internal narrative is seductive. It wants to be queen. It wants to own the house. It wants to convince you that without it, nothing exists, that if the noise stops, you disappear. But look carefully at the lie. When a thought disappears, do you disappear with it? When an emotion goes away, do you go away with it? When fear falls silent for a few seconds, do you cease to exist? No. Something remains. Something stays. Something watches. Something crosses the chaos without being the chaos. And that is exactly what the mind cannot tolerate, because the mind accepts being trained, accepts being analyzed, even accepts being controlled for a while, but it hates being unmasked as an observed object. In Rumi's path, the center of transformation is not the worship of thought, but the purification of the heart understood as the living center of perception. He repeatedly works with the image of the heart as a mirror. When this mirror is covered in rust, you do not see the real, you see only distortion. And the rust in this context is not a beautiful abstraction. It is the accumulation of ego, vanity, attachment, reactivity, the impulse to take every internal noise as final truth. The translation presented in Dar al-Maznavi summarizes this directly. If the mirror of the heart is opaque, the rust has not been removed. So understand the weight of this. The problem is not that you have thoughts. The problem is that your mirror is so covered with the dust of identification that you look at the movement of the mind and think you are looking at yourself. And this is where the observer begins to appear, not as a pretty idea, not as a memorized concept, not as a spiritual fantasy, but as a brutally simple experience. You close your eyes for a moment and wait. Soon a thought comes, perhaps an image, perhaps a fear, perhaps a sentence, perhaps a memory, perhaps a judgment about this very exercise. And then the question returns with the force of a clean blade. Who noticed this? Do not answer quickly. Do not turn the question into an opinion. Do not say it's me too fast, because that automatic me is almost always just another thought trying to grab the microphone. Stay for a second before answering. Feel. The thought appeared. It was noticed. Then it changed. Then another came. Then another. But the noticing continued. This noticing is not shouting. This noticing does not need to compete for space. This noticing does not advertise itself. It is simply there. It has always been there. Before the beautiful thought, and before the ugly thought, before the memory, and before the fear, before approval, and before shame. Do you see what this does to your pain? It doesn't disappear by magic, but it loses the throne. Because what was destroying you was not just the thought. It was the blind marriage with it. It was the fusion. It was the confusion. It was the hypnotic bond between the voice and identity. The moment observation appears, distance arises. And where there is distance, there is freedom. Small at first, almost fragile, almost ridiculous, but real. And real freedom almost always begins small, because the false self grows in exaggeration, while real presence grows in silence. In Sufism, there is the language of the nafs, the lower self, the ego that demands, reacts, wants to dominate, wants to be the center, and turns everything into hunger for itself. In texts on Rumi's philosophy, this nafs appears as that which governs the partial mind and keeps the human being trapped in the illusion of their own ego. So when you hear within yourself a voice that wants to protect itself all the time, that wants to win all the time, that wants to be right all the time, that wants to turn every experience into confirmation of itself, you are not hearing the deep truth of your being. Often, you are only hearing the nafs trying to survive, and the nafs is cunning. It dresses itself as logic. It dresses itself as prudence. It dresses itself as identity. It even dresses itself as spirituality. It can say, I want peace, while, deep down, it only wants to remain in control. It can say, I want to know myself, while it only wants to build a more sophisticated version of its own mask. That is why this path is frightening, because perceiving the observer behind the thoughts does not soothe the ego. It weakens its dominion, and the ego panics when it senses that it is no longer the owner of the house. That is when resistances arise: restlessness, sleepiness, escape, haste, the need to intellectualize everything, the urge to turn the experience into discourse instead of living it. You have seen this happen. When silence begins to open, something in you wants to grab the phone, remember a problem, create a theory, seek a distraction, anything to prevent the naked encounter with presence, because presence dismantles characters, and the character prefers any known pain to a truth that dissolves it. Rumi is not a thinker of noise, he is a master of crossing through noise. In traditions and translations linked to his work, silence reappears as a key, including in the simple and incisive form of silence is better. But do not understand silence as empty muteness. It is not just not speaking. It is ceasing to bow to this internal commentator that opines on everything, ruins everything, assigns value to everything, compares everything. The silence this path speaks of is not the dead absence of thought. It is the living presence that does not kneel before it. It is the space in which thought can pass without hijacking the throne of being, And perhaps now you are feeling a strange discomfort because a part of you wants to turn this into an idea quickly. It wants to say, I understand. It wants to take this truth and make it into another mental ornament. But do not do that, because understanding with the mind is precisely the most elegant way to remain trapped. You do not need to collect a new explanation. You need to be pierced by a new vision. And the new vision is brutal. You have given your life to voices that are not stable, not reliable, and do not even remain. You have built moods, decisions, relationships, guilt, and even self-images based on passing thoughts. You have bowed before kings that last a second. And now you may be seeing the magnitude of the loss, not because you thought wrongly once or twice, but because you handed your entire identity to movements that were never worthy of that throne. Look closely at your experience right now. There may be a thought saying this is too deep, another saying this is too simple, another saying you've heard something like this before, another saying nothing will change, another saying maybe it will. All of them are arising within the same field of perception. Do you see? The content changes. The perceiving does not change at the same speed. The content contradicts itself. The perceiving holds the contradiction. The content suffers, demands, comments. The perceiving witnesses. The content wants a conclusion. The perceiving is in no hurry. And when you begin to notice this honestly, something very painful becomes clear. Thought always wanted to be the master, but it never managed to remain the same for very long. There is a very powerful image for this. You spent years sitting in the audience, crying, trembling, humiliating yourself, exalting yourself, because you forgot you were watching a stage. Every thought entered disguised as truth. Every emotion entered disguised as destiny. Every fear entered disguised as prophecy. And you, hypnotized, applauded, despaired, believed, ran, returned, undid, redid, everything, because you forgot there was a deeper place from which all of it could be seen. I am not telling you to deny the pain. I am not telling you to pretend nothing touches you. I am not telling you to become stone. I am saying something more demanding: to feel without fusing, to observe without fleeing, to pass through without surrendering the throne. This is very different. It requires inner maturity. It requires courage. It requires a rare honesty, because it is easier to suffer inside the old story than to die to it. And yes, there is a small death here. In Sufism, there is the language of the erasure of the false center, the emptying of the narrow self before something greater than it. In classical terms, this appears in notions such as fana, the passing away of the ego so that divine reality is not obscured by self-worship. But bring this into simple language. It is the death of your slavery to the internal voice as sovereign. It is ceasing the automatic worship of every thought that arises. It is stopping the feeding of the imposter that speaks within you as if it were the owner of the universe. And this hurts because the false self would rather suffer than disappear. It accepts living in war as long as it remains at the center. That is why you avoid being truly alone, because when external noise falls away, what governs you from within begins to appear, and almost no one wants to see that clearly. Almost no one wants to realize how much they are manipulated by repeated internal phrases. Almost no one wants to admit that they have spent years obeying a tired, wounded, automatic, repetitive mind. But there is something even more painful than seeing this, continuing this way, continuing to be pulled by the same mechanism, continuing to call any narrative that invades you truth, continuing to treat every thought as a sentence, continuing to wake up inside your own head as if waking in a courtroom where the judge, the accuser, and the executioner are the same voice. So do it now, not tomorrow, not later, not in theory. Pause for a moment. Wait for the next thought to arrive. Do not call it. Do not fight it. Do not run from it. Just wait. It comes. It always comes. Maybe a worry will come. Maybe an image. Maybe a comment about this very moment. Now look with brutality. Did you see it arrive? Then it was not you. It was seen. Wait for another. See another. Wait for another. See another. Do not look for a special state. Do not look for lights. Do not look for visions. Just see the simplest and most devastating fact. The thought appears to you, and what appears to you cannot be the totality of what you are. If this touches deeply, a shift begins. You no longer need to defeat every thought. You need to stop crowning each of them. You do not need to turn the mind into a desert. You need to stop calling it king. You do not need to destroy thought. You need to see that it is movement, not essence. And this turn changes everything, because fear loses some of its poison when it is seen. Shame loses part of its theater when it is seen. Anxiety loses a layer of its dominance when it is seen. Being seen does not erase them automatically, but it prevents them from so easily dressing themselves as identity. And this is where many people retreat, because seeing the observer behind thoughts removes an old excuse. The excuse of saying, "This is just how I am," every time a mental pattern takes over. Maybe you are not like that. Maybe you are simply accustomed to believing the same kind of noise. Maybe you are not your stream of thought, but the forgotten space through which that stream passes. Maybe there is a dignity in you far deeper than your internal dialogue allows you to feel. Maybe what you have called I for so many years has been nothing more than dust spinning in a dark room, while the window was always there, waiting to be opened. In Rumi's universe, the living heart is not a storage place for beautiful phrases. It is a place of real perception. Living water does not come only from outside, through imitation. It springs from within when a person stops living merely on borrowed spirituality. In a reading of his philosophy, merely copied knowledge is compared to water brought from outside, while realized knowledge springs from the center. This has everything to do with what you are facing here, because it is not enough to repeat, "I am not my thoughts." That can become just another dead phrase. What matters is to feel for yourself the instant when a thought appears and you remain, the instant when fear speaks and something in you listens without reducing itself to it, the instant when sadness passes through your chest but can no longer convince you that it is the final shape of your identity. So the question returns, not as a striking phrase, but as a door that no longer closes. Who is observing your thoughts? Do not answer in haste. Do not kill this question with a definition. Let it pass through you. Let it tear away masks. Let it reveal how much of your life has been governed by an unstable narrator. Let it show that there is something in you more intimate than the mind, more silent than language, more constant than your states. And if you feel this even for a single clear second, you will understand why so many people fear silence, because silence begins to show who has been in charge of you all this time, and it also begins to show who has never ceased to be there, seeing everything, even before the first thought said, "I." And when this presence begins to be felt, the next question is already born with fire in the chest. If I am not the voice that speaks within me, then who is this false self that suffers, begs, defends itself, and takes my place every time I forget to look? In the end, the question is not how many thoughts pass through your mind, but who in you remains, seeing all of them pass without disappearing along with them. And perhaps the greatest turning point of your life begins exactly here, in the moment you stop calling yourself by the name of your fear, your anxiety, or your confusion, and begin to realize that there is something deeper, cleaner, and more real within you. So comment below. Have you ever been able to notice this observer at any moment in your life? Share this video with someone who is drowning in their own internal noise. And if this kind of content touches the deepest place in your soul, subscribe to the channel, because what comes after this discovery can completely change the way you see yourself.